So we didn't do a meeting the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, nobody had anything important to say, so we didn't record it. And then last week, Al was on the road and I couldn't figure out how to start up the Zoom meetings. And after that meeting, I spent an hour and a half digging through Zoom. And I think if I have to, I can now, within 5 to 10 minutes, figure out how to start a meeting and let everybody know what it is. So hopefully we don't run into that again. So I've done it in the past, but in the past, I always had to schedule a meeting and do all kinds of stupid stuff. Now I figured out I can click a button and say start it, and it will start. It's just a matter that none of their stuff makes any sense. It's kind of like the Slack stuff. None of that makes any sense either. So anyway, so this week we are starting like we're supposed to, and that's why we didn't have meetings the last 2 weeks. So what I with all this extra time, I basically get nothing done. But last week sometime I thought I'll just hack in this stuff I was talking about. I wanted to have the switches on my remote control box. So one switch would select what steering angle I want, and the other switch would say, do you want to turn left or turn right or be in the center? I thought, well, I'll just hack all that and drop it into my code. So I tracked down my code and found it and went to put that in there. And I realized my code's a total mess. I thought even just trying to hack it in was going to be more effort than I wanted. So I thought I'd go track down, look at the code and see what's there and see how I can clean it up somewhat. So I spent some time trying to do that. And one of my issues is the currently I have the remote control stuff goes directly into the low level microcontroller. So my remote control does not go through ROS. And that gives me the advantage without starting up ROS, without starting up the Linux computer. In fact, I don't even have to have a Linux computer on it. I can just turn on the power on the vehicle and turn on the power on the remote control and go drive the thing around. And that's why I did it that way. What else is the point on that? Oh, so anyway, that goes directly in the microcontroller. And as I move the joystick around, I get a value of like plus and minus 128 that comes out of the joystick. And that's just simply the way it happened to work at the time. So the way it currently works is if I have the switch on the remote control set to manual mode, then it says take the incoming values from the joysticks of one plus and minus 128 and multiply that by whatever scale factor it takes to give me a signal from my RC servo on my steering to set that from full left to full right. So I think I just blatantly multiplied by like 13 or something like that, and it came out close enough that it was completely drivable and that all worked. But the point is that had nothing to do with angles or anything that ROS would send out. So this is totally separate. And then if I wanted a ROS message, I'd flip the switch on the remote into autonomous mode, and that tells the code, oh, take the incoming messages, say an incoming command velocity message, and strip off the forward velocity and the steering angle. And then I would go through and convert the steering angle, again, multiply it by whatever scale factor it takes to convert the angle request into a full plus and minus left and right hard stop on the vehicle. So I was doing that two different ways. And then if I add these switches, well, then the switches, I thought, well, I want to actually type in an angle because that's the whole point of what I'm trying to do right now. So if I put the switch and say position 1, I might say 7 degrees or whatever that is in radians, or at the hard stop, it's like, I think by analyzing some old plots, I think it's like 28.6 degrees or close to 0.5 radians. And I thought, well, what I could do, or what I should do, is convert all three of these things so they all put out a steering angle. So from the joystick, I'll just take the plus and minus 128, multiply it by a scale factor to convert that to, say, plus and minus 30 degrees, which is plus and minus 0.5 radians. And I have to decide internally, do I want to run in degrees or radians? Because I don't think in radians. A half a radian doesn't mean anything to me. So anyway, if I convert that to an angle, then I can either select that angle or the stuff coming from ROS is already in an angle. And then my new stuff with the switches, when I pound that in, that'll put out an angle. So now it's a matter of selecting from one of three sources, all as an angle. And then once I have the angle, you just have to multiply that, again, multiply it by a scale factor to give me my, say, plus and minus 30 degrees on my steering. to convert the plus and minus 30 degrees to whatever the RC servo pulse is to give me, full left to full right. And the other thing I thought about, I was going to agonize over my remote control and say, okay, if I go full left and full right, do I call that 28.6 degrees or do I call that 30 degrees? I thought, well, I can scale it to anything. If I just call it 30 degrees, and even if that's too much, then basically the code on the vehicle will say limit it so you don't go further than whatever value I tell it. So it's just, and if it turns out the joystick has too small a range, it just won't go all the way to the hard stop. So either way, the number on the remote control really doesn't matter. So that's what I've been thinking about, and I just need to go change the code. So all three of those methods give me an angle and then proceed on from there. And I see we just had a new member join. Should we acknowledge this at this point?
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, so I see this is the first time you've been on, so.
Yeah, that's right. I'm joining in from Singapore. Essentially, I've been interested in ag-tech robotics for a while. I was exploring harvesting robots for strawberries for the outdoors, and then I was looking at palm harvesting. And then I essentially noticed that for all these companies, making the autonomous software is super hard. So then I started looking at whether it would be possible to, whether it would be better to have a remote teleoperation and data set generation tool for these companies, so they can actually first validate their hardware and business use case before they can jump into autonomy, so they can save some time before they can start generating revenue. So that's essentially what I do. It essentially more interested in the mobile manipulators, but I want to know more about what you all work on and what you do in this community.
Well, I'll make the comment that what I do, I just do this as a hobby. For a while, I did it. I had a professional job where we took a full-size tractor and modified it for a trade show to say, oh, our company is getting into autonomous vehicles. So I did that. I worked there for a couple of years until they decided they didn't want to pay me anymore. So I'm back to just doing this as a hobby again. And I do this every time. Let me pull up my choose background. No. Okay, where is it? So now, of course, I don't see the one I want. So I'll pull up this one. Anyway, this is my vehicle. I just built this from scratch, and it's got it's about 1 meter long, and I don't know what the width of it is, and it's basically just something I put all the stuff together to build. I wanted a small version of the full size tractor that we had, or Al is using a lawn tractor, and a lawn tractor is basically just a scaled down full size tractor. So my vehicle is about half the size of a lawn tractor, and I just built it from scratch. And it's got an electric motor in the back to drive it. I've got a giant RC servo in the front, like one of these RC servos to run the steering on the thing, and that seemed to work out pretty well. And it's got dual GPS on it, so the back GPS, which you probably, I guess, is cut off here. The back GPS, I feed it correction data, so I get RTK position, and that seems to work fairly well. And then the front antenna up here on the thing is, I just run that as an experiment just to give me my heading, and that seemed to turn out to work out pretty well too. So it gives you a heading within like half a degree accuracy, and whether you're moving or not, that gives you your heading. And normally GPS, you have to be moving it before it will actually generate a correct heading for you. So anyway, I just put all this together as just a way to experiment with this stuff. And I don't seem to have enough ambition anymore to actually just run right out and try this stuff. So it takes me a long time to get anything done anymore. So that's basically what I'm doing. My whole objective is.
Nice.
Al or Bob, do you want to say what you're doing quickly without going into a lot of detail?
Go ahead, Al.
Similar to Jeff, I mean, I do this as a hobby.
I've got property with cattle on it. The aspiration would be to, automate a number of functions around the property, like cutting hay, raking hay, putting down herbicide, cutting grass along the fence. I mean, once you get autonomous control or even digital control, I think there's a lot of tasks that could be made easier or semi-automated. So that's my use case, if you will. As Jeff said, although I've got a full-size tractor, I'm trying to get the control stuff organized with an 18 horsepower garden tractor, just to start. That's it.
Interesting.
My name is Bob Bassett, in Lake, Minnesota. Right now, I'm using an iPhone call in from Lawrence Lake, which is a lake property that we own. We have a 25-acre hobby farm, and in the past, we raised U-pick strawberries, and that's where most of my things that I wanted to throw electronics at. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of time and money to do it. Anyway, my current project is trying to remote control a Mahindra 4020 hydrostatic tractor. And I'm using parts from salvaged tenant floor sweepers. So that's where the motors came from, where all the brackets and the hardware. I was looking at Raspberry Pi and Teensy, but I got impatient with developing a remote control. So I dug out something called a VEX microcontroller. It was developed back in 2005, mostly for high school kids and having competition and learning. So it's pretty crude. The system has some canned programs that I can use without having to get into coding. So I can use the remote control and a joystick and control two motors on the tractor, one for steering and one for the forward reverse. I'm having a little bit of trouble with the response in that when I move the joystick, it's way too sensitive, so it jerks the tractor. There's some controls that I can adjust maybe, but that's pretty much where I'm at right now. Eventually I'd like to get into the more sophisticated stuff, but we've got a new wrinkle. My wife wants to sell the hobby farm and move up to the lake, so I won't have any use for a tractor. So I think I'll stop development on the tractor and focus either on what we call sometimes a Barbie Jeep, one of the Jeeps that kids ride around in, battery powered, or I'll go the lawnmower thing. And it's just something that I'll have up here at the lake, either as a surveillance bot or, well, I'll dream up some use to justify it. But anyway, that's where I'm at.
Interesting. Yeah, I just saw the video of you remote controlling the tractor. Pretty nice.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were something about strawberries, did you?
Yeah. So essentially, I was exploring with a robot, which was an outdoor AMR, and it had a mobile manipulator on top of it, something like this one, for example. And it would just go around and pick strawberries. But then the harder part is not the hardware, but the software to make it run autonomously. Everything from perception to motion planning is super difficult. Um, Even if we want to do that, and even if, let's say, there's a good team to do that, data sets is a bottleneck in general. And so I kind of just naturally shifted towards making this tool which could help uh, log and collect the data set and remotely teleoperate. So like just like you're remotely controlling it, but to do it from just about any part of the world. So even if you fill the vacancy for the worker in the in a farm in California, for example, with someone from, I don't know, Philippines or India or somewhere, you could still essentially do that profitably.
Sounds good. What are you using for a camera and visual recognition?
So was that?
Are you using a camera and visual identifying strawberries locating?
Yeah, so that's the idea, that whether it's an RGB camera or a depth camera, um, essentially something which gives the operator a view of the, like the egocentric view of the robot, and then they can identify what they need to pick and then move the manipulator to pick it. That's good enough, and then you can actually collect the data sets.
Oh, interesting. I'd like to follow your project.
Yeah, I'm pretty early right now. Yeah, I'm just trying to talk to people who are working in this field to understand whether this even makes sense to begin with. I mean, it sounds cool, but then does it make sense? So that's where I'm at.
What processors are you working with?
It's really processor agnostic. What I'm planning to do is focus on making it compliant with the ROS middleware. So if your robot uses ROS, then you would be able to use it. I've been talking to some companies outside of agriculture who are in self-driving. So, for example, autonomous trucking companies in US, and they mentioned they use middlewares like OpenPilot, and they said that they would like to have support of that. I'm not sure if you use any middleware to work on your projects, but if there's something and it's different from ROS, that would be interesting. I would love to know that.
So you're planning on using autopilot?
Not at the moment. At the
Oh,
moment, want to stick with ROS.
okay. Yeah, I'd
But
like to follow your. Do you have a Facebook page or project page?
Yeah, I do have a website that I can drop the link to. But at this point, it's like very. Oops. Oh wait, there's a typo in there. Yep. So the idea is you would be able to install it on any of your robots, or in this case, for example, tractors, and then from anywhere you could be able to control it. Definitely, you would need a visual source. So probably this can be, for tractors, it can be as simple as a single camera.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Is that something which can be useful from all of your experiences on farms?
Um, I'd really like to follow your project and then maybe kind of chip in once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does sound like the fact that if you get a vehicle that can do a task, and then, as you say, connect it over the internet and you get anybody in the world to drive the thing, then that would, that way someone could sit in there, get up in the morning, sit in their bedroom and pick strawberries all day doing that and get paid to do that. So that does seem like as long as you get good connection between all this stuff. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like when they drive stuff around on Mars, it takes them 20 minutes to do anything. So in that case, they have to put it in. The thing has to be able to drive from point A to point B on its own. So you might run into problems like that where, if you got bad connections, that it's got to be able to do some of that stuff on its own. And then somebody says, okay, now move on to the next one or whatever. But yeah, that sounds like it's an interesting concept, whether or not you can get it done before anybody else does. As soon as you say you're going to do that, everybody else is going to jump on that now and try to do
Oh
the
yeah.
same thing.
More and more
So-
of the agriculture in the West Coast, like oranges and strawberries, they're pushing real hard for automation. So it's going to be a race to who comes first.
Yeah. Yeah, I also read about, I mean, definitely you all are in the US, so you know better, but I was reading that people are trying to shift the whole farms to Mexico because that's where people are. But then does not really make sense. Like California has the right weather to grow strawberries, for example. Um, in terms of the internet connection, generally, how is the internet connectivity on farms? Is it patchy? Is it okay if you have like a SIM module on board? How is it?
I don't know much about Germany, but on the strawberries, they have a chilling requirement. They have to have the mother plants before you put them in the ground, or if they're in the ground, they require I forget what the number is, but it's like over 100 hours of chill. So you have to get that temperature down. The other thing people may not be considering is climate change. The growing zones are drifting up. So someone predicted, like here in Minnesota, we're going to look like Kansas eventually. So that's going to have a major impact on what we grow, and I'm sure there's geneticists that are preparing for that with new varieties, but it's going to take a while.
As far as the internet connectivity, I think you can fix any problem, but it costs money.
Yeah.
I think there's now with Starlink, there's hardly any area that that you can't get decent
Yeah,
service.
that's true.
But then you have to, if you want to use Wi-Fi as your topology, then you've got to create some sort of mesh network in your field. I'm trying to use a bit of a mixture of Wi-Fi and LoRa radio, but then again, I don't have video. I'm not trying to do teleoperation and need some low latency, high resiliency link. If I were doing that, I would have to put Wi-Fi repeaters to cover the field.
Right.
The Japanese have been experimenting with autonomous strawberry picking in a greenhouse. But I haven't followed that for a couple of years now.
Now, cell service, I mean, you can also put a dedicated, cell modem on the vehicle as well. I have to say, in my particular space, again, I don't know what your bandwidth requirements are, but 2 megabyte speed, certainly, I think, achievable with a reasonably priced cell modem.
Yeah, so like 2 to 4 Mbps is essentially all you need. The data requirements for remote teleop essentially is very low resolution one-way video stream. The other stream from the operator to the robot is just the controls, which is very sparse and very it's just very like consumes very less data. And for the operator to control the robot, they can get away with something like 360p video recording as well. As far as the logs is concerned, that is something which can be sent later on in bulk when the robot actually goes on the offline.
Yeah, if I were doing teleoperation, I think I would. There's going to be plenty of places that have decent enough cell service to get a cell modem on there. Yes, you're going to run into places that can't accommodate that, but holy cow. there's a ton of coverage for cell service in the US.
Hmm.
I think I remember something about an autonomous orange picker. It was like two vehicles. The first one would identify the fruit, the second one would pick it, and they use multiple arms to pick. And that's what you might have to do with strawberries if you want to compete with hand laborers, multiple pickers at one time.
Interesting.
Yeah, for your application, it seems like if you had a remote operator and basically they just look at the screen and they can see the strawberries they want to pick. If they could just click on, click, click, click and say, pick these strawberries. And then you have the machine is smart enough to say, okay, I can see the point where you told me, and then it's smart enough to go out and reach around and grab the strawberry and pick it and put it in the thing by itself. So really, it's just a matter of the operator saying, I want this one and this one. And then when you get all those picked, you say drive ahead, a certain distance and just do the whole process again. So if you can put the
I
actual,
like that idea.
yeah, the control of the arm, if you can get all that autonomously done right on the vehicle, and that way you just simply say, go pick the strawberry and then let it do that. And that also cuts down your communications back and forth. So people aren't having to, physically move the arm around and do all that kind of stuff. So that might be reasonable to do all that.
I think there was some weed identification and eradication that did that. It would identify it and then, like you say, have the code take over and hit that spot.
Yeah, one of the things that I need to find out is whether the detection is the hard part or actually motion planning is the harder part. I would assume motion planning is the harder part because even if you detect something, and if you're not using a stereo camera, then it's super difficult. Detection is also not easy because like unlike the weed cutting or weed elimination, you would run into problems like occlusion by leaves. So you probably want to pluck some fruits which are not even visible without with if you before you move the leaves around. So yeah, that's also something I need to figure out.
Okay. Since we're talking about maybe time sensitive development, like in your case, maybe we ought to figure out how to communicate or what to share publicly and what should be shared privately. It all depends on your case, on how you want to proceed.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't understand.
Since you're in private development and you're going to make money off of it, we have to consider the fact that this is a public forum. So we'll have to be limited on what to discuss publicly or what we can discuss privately, like with the three of us. So just a heads up.
Got it.
Yeah. So we have the option. We can just, turn off the recording and discuss anything anybody wants to. And then, so if you have things you don't want the entire world to know, or if you just want to talk to one person individually, we could always set that up too, where we could do that type of thing. But just keep in mind, anything you say right now is being recorded and we're putting that out on the internet for anyone to see. So, just if you have something you don't want everybody to know, just keep that in mind. Maybe make notes ahead of time and say, if you just want to discuss it with a small group of people, we can do that. But when we start these meetings, we always start off ahead of time and say, does anybody want to discuss something that, is not to be recorded? And we talk about, today I was talking about they're trying to put fiber optic internet into my neighborhood. So I brought that up and, things like this come up. And then once we start the meeting, then we do whatever we want. And then when we're all done, we say, okay, are we all done? We stop and then we can talk later after the meeting too. So So just keep that in mind. Anything you say right now is being recorded, so anybody
Sure.
can hear it. So just remember that.
Got it. Yeah.
And back to the question about, how do you actually make this work as far as identifying a remote operator, identifying strawberries and trying to pick them. The easiest way to answer that is get your little vehicle and put it in a field and have somebody, they could either be in the same room or, wherever they are, and just go through an experiment and say, here, you as a new operator, I want you to pick those strawberries. Does this work for you? So, without getting too carried away, just grab somebody that knows a little bit about strawberries and then say, here's your controls, go out and try to make this pick strawberries and see how well that works for you. And you could do it with somebody that knows something about strawberries and something about picking strawberries, and then find somebody that knows nothing about it and say, can I take a totally inexperienced operator and put them on this and make the thing work? And that's just, that's going to be the easiest thing to do. Just try it out and see how it works for, it doesn't seem viable that would work as a service you can sell to someone.
Yeah.
And no matter how much you plan it out, once you go to try it, it's not going to work. So yeah, that's why you have to keep experimenting and have people trying it all the way along before you get, don't spend 3 years trying to get this to work and then say that's great, and people say I can't make that work. So that's just something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, it has to be a trade-off.
You might end up smashing everything you pick.
Yeah.
And you mentioned trying to control the arm. There are packages in ROS that I can't think what they're called right now, but there's a package is meant to control robot arms. And if you say point your camera over there and say I want you to grab that thing, it's smart enough to figure out all the joints and essentially make the thing do that. So that would be if you get it down to that point where you can just simply say in 3D space, say there's an object right there, I want you to grab that and do something with it, then turn it over to the ROS and let it control the arm and do that for you.
Yes.
But it's going to just take a lot of experimentation, I think, to see how well you can get it to work and how quickly you can get it to work.
True.
And as I said before, I was going to put the picture of my vehicle up here. I found the background that puts up here's my vehicle from the side view, and you can see again here's the back antenna and the front antenna, and it happens to have one of those old sick lidars bolted on the front, which it isn't hooked up right now. But if I just plug it in, it does work. And I basically have this plastic box here that has most of the electronics. Then I've got a second one on top that has GPS stuff in it now, and then I put a laptop on top of that, and that's just simply gives me a vehicle that I can drive around. And the whole point was to make it like a full-size farm tractor or like a lawn tractor. So that's why it got built the way it is. I was just trying to come up with a smaller version that's easier to transport, and if I need to, I can take it in the house and get it through the doorways. So that's what drove my whole design process there.
Got it. Yeah, that's smart. How much did it cost you to make that?
I have no idea. Most of it's used parts or surplus parts. And in the back, the main thing on the back, it's got a transaxle out of a mobility scooter. These little cars, 3 or 4 wheel cars that people drive around. You see them driving down the sidewalk. It has one of those, so you just basically buy that and bolt it on. I paid like $50 for it. And now I go look on eBay and they want like $100 or more for them. But it's nice because it's got the motor and the gear reduction and the differential and the bearings. You just bolt it down to the frame. You bolt your wheels onto it, and that gives you your full drive system in the back. And then the front, I built that out of like go-kart parts. So I bought pieces off of eBay and welded them together, and then took one of these giant RC servos and hooked up to make the steering work. So most of it just pieced together. There's no now if I had bought this lidar back in the day, those were $5,000 to $8,000 a piece. That's something I found on eBay for $300. So it's an antique and nobody uses them anymore. But so I got all this old junk that I use. So I have no idea what it actually cost, and it took me. I've been working on this for years, mainly because I started off pretty good and then slowly started slowing down on everything. But it's just a matter of, deciding what you want it to do and then just try to model after. If you can model after something else, that works out really well. And then otherwise, just make it up from scratch. So
Got it. And so all of you are working on one single project, one single, you're trying to develop some kind of package for automating tractors, or you all doing your own separate projects?
I would say basically everybody's doing their own project, and they're just, again, going down the path, trying to learn this stuff, and then trying to, come up with their own vehicle, and then try to figure out what kind of software do you need to make that do, make it do anything. And then you have a specific task. Al wants to go out in a hay field with a big tractor and drive around in a pattern and mow the hay, and then come back and then have it run a hay baler, so it picks up the hay and makes bales and drops them in the field. And then maybe he'll have one of his robots will go out and then pick up the hay bales and put them on a rack and bring them back to his barn or something. But so it really, the first thing is just try to figure out, one of the simplest things is, everybody's got, at least around here, everybody's got a yard with grass, and you have to go out and mow the grass. So if you could just take an existing lawnmower and automate that and have it drive around and mow your yard, that way you have an excuse to actually build this thing and try to do something fun with it. So a lot of it's just based on, so I'd say the objective most people have is just try to figure out how to do this stuff and learn how it works. And then Al seems to have the best path going forward. He's got a farm, and he's got lots of different things lots of different tasks he could use an autonomous vehicle for. And I live in town, and I just got this little yard, and I don't really have a good use for it other than just trying to learn how this stuff works and just something to play around with.
Go ahead.
And another comment that I'll make is that so far everybody's using ROS 1 and hasn't switched over to ROS 2, simply because everybody in this group seems to more or less knows ROS 1. And so if somebody's starting from scratch, they say, well, do I use ROS 1 or ROS 2? And my point is always, well, if you want help and support from us, well, we're using more ROS 1, so you could start with that. And I don't think it's going to be that big a deal to switch over once people get that far. I have loaded up ROS 2 and played with it. And as long as there's modules to do what you want, it kind of works like ROS 1. You stick all the modules together and away you go, But if you run into something that doesn't have a module already written for it, then you have to go through and either write your own or track one down to make that work. So I'm not sure, to get everybody up to, switch over to ROS 2, I'm not sure what that's going to take. But the argument in the industry is, if you're starting a project from scratch, brand new, you may as well go with ROS 2, learn ROS 2 and put that on your vehicle and use that. But if you've been doing this for 10 or 20 years and you were using ROS 1, you might want to stick with ROS 1 until you get it all to the point where it's ready to go, and then make the plunge and just switch it over to ROS 2. So that's just something else to think about.
And the other sort of common thread that the three of us have been dealing with is an Ackerman steering vehicle, right? And so we have found, by the by, there's not a ton of support for Ackerman vehicles in the ROS world. And when you try to do navigation with an Ackerman vehicle and running a waypoint mission, yeah, I mean, we haven't found a ton of open models to follow. So it's been ROS 1 using microcontrollers, ROS serial to communicate to them, GPS, understanding the various GPS options, trying to figure out the waypoints, getting it to run a navigation path. I mean, those have been all some of the common challenges that we've been working our way through. And those would fit with a lot of different use cases, quite honestly.
So has all of that been documented somewhere, where like the kind of different kind of sensors that you have to that you have used and the problems you ran into?
One piece of advice that I was given a long time ago is start off with something really simple and get that going, and then just build from there. I think it was Jeff that told me that once.
The
Maybe.
documentation is a little bit, well, it's not been done. It's a little bit loosey-goosey. And so the URL that I put up there, that's one good place to turn. We also have,
Okay.
it's not curated, but the YouTube channel that Jeff maintains is there, which is obviously exhaustive, but like I said, not necessarily curated for somebody who has, I have question A, how do I get question A answered? We at one
Got
time
it.
still had Google Drive. I think it's still out there, but again, not maintained or curated. But if you have a question, I mean, that's what the Slack channel is for as well, because we're happy to help.
Got it.
Yeah, Al does the best attempt at documentation on all the stuff that we do, and I'm very lazy about it. In fact, I don't even make up schematics of my stuff. So when I want to change something, I have to go back and dig through my wiring to figure out what I need to change. So I'm not an authority on any kind of documentation. But now going back to the YouTube channel, as Al says, we got the videos there, and I keep an ongoing index that's just kind of a free flow. As we go through the meeting here, it'll say Jeff started talking about his software, and the new guy started, and he told us about a strawberry robot, and it's that type of information that I put down. And once we started this group, I think from day one, I've got all those documented. And before that, we were in the ROS agriculture group, and there's like 3 years of videos there, and those got deleted off the YouTube index. Yet, if you go back to I was trying to index all those, and that's at the bottom of every time in fact, at the bottom of every YouTube video that I post, down in the description will say, here's the index for the original ROS agriculture stuff. And the stuff is still out there. You just have to know the URL to get to it. So if you pull up the index and search for, say, GPS, it's going to bring up 100 different videos. And then if you just find something in the description that sounds like that's what you want, you can cut and paste that URL and put it back into a browser, and it will bring up that video and play the old ROS agriculture stuff. And we had a lot more people on in those days, and there's some pretty interesting stuff that went by. And one of the things, if you go to the index and search for presentation, you'll find people will say, well, I built something like this, and this is how I built it, and this is what I'm using to control it. This is what I'm using. This is the task that I'm using it for. So there's a lot of good information back in that. If just dig through that index and see if there's anything there that you want to see. And then for the current stuff, the lawn tractor automation group, that the index page actually comes up, and you can see a little icon of each meeting, which doesn't necessarily give you a lot of information. Usually it's just a picture of 2 or 3 people on the screen is what the initial picture is, but at least there you've got a picture to associate. You can just click on that, and it starts up the video, and you can watch it. So there's an index for the new stuff and an index for the old stuff that I maintain out on my webpage somewhere.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. So ROS agriculture is stopped now, is it?
Yes, that just kind of vaporized in a very short amount of time. And I announced to a lot of people that it was going to go away, and if you wanted to back it up, you should. And then at some point, somebody asked on what is it called, ROS Discourse. They said, well, what happened to the ROS agriculture group? And I said, well, it went away, but we started this new group, and I put a link, and maybe that's how you found our stuff here. Yeah. So anyway, the original ROS agriculture stuff is basically gone, and somebody tried to back up the Slack channel, And there's, if you dig through the stuff, there's links that'll get you to various things there. And so some of this, you can get to some of the stuff, but it didn't save all the, anything was in a thread that did not get saved. And I don't know if it saved any of the pictures or not. And we now have the same problem on this new group because Slack has decided you can only keep messages for 90 days. And after 90 days, they just disappear. Now, if you're willing to pay money, you can get all that stuff back. But so Bob just posted his pictures and videos of what he's doing, but within 90 days, those will just disappear. So, don't count on putting something on Slack to document it forever because that will indeed go away. So I forgot why I was mentioning that. Just some of the things you learn as you start playing with the stuff. We're using the free software, and it doesn't necessarily. It started off. They'd say, "Oh, if you get more than 10,000 messages, we'll start deleting the old stuff." Then they thought, "Yeah, we're not making any money, so we'll say." To your advantage, we'll only let you keep messages for 90 days and they'll disappear. It'll be great for everyone. So anyway, that made that pretty much worthless for, long-term. You can't use it for long-term backup because Bob had gone through and created his own channel under ROS Agriculture and documented it. He had tons of documentation stuff there, and it just slowly started falling off the back end and all went away. So that I think he was a little disappointed that that's the way it worked, but that's the way that turned out. And
Big time.
back on ROS Agriculture, there were like 400 members or something, and there are people from all over the world.
Yeah.
And there's some really interesting stuff if you dig back through that. And again, a good thing to do is search for presentation. And there are people all over the world, talking about their vehicles they built, either built from scratch or modified, or talking about how they're using it out in the real world. So it's if you got some time, sometime, it's worth digging through that stuff.
One thing I've been thinking about doing, considering what your last remarks about preservation, is post stuff to the channel just to see if anyone's interested. And then if they are, then we can bring it up in more detail in a YouTube.
Makes sense.
And the other thing to keep in mind, I've noticed this over time. Say we're going along talking about stuff here, and somebody said, "Oh, I posted that on Slack." Well, that doesn't do any good because number one, somebody watching this video may not be able to get into Slack or not know where it's at, and so it's always good, like right here, if somebody say if I just fire up screen sharing and just as an example here, let's see where's right there, screen share. Say screen 2. And if I look at, oh, now it's not going to work, is it? Well, anyway, if you're going to present something on Zoom, it's best if you're going to use it from Slack, go to Slack and find it and open it up as a window. And I don't know why I can't find anything now because I've got 4 of Bob's windows open here on the screen somewhere, but here, what's this do? No, that doesn't work. Anyway, it's good to tie Zoom and Slack together. So as Bob says, if we mention it on Slack and you want to present it on Zoom, I know back under ROS Agriculture, it was, "Oh, I posted on Slack under this channel," and then all that stuff disappeared. So you watch the video and you don't know what it was anymore. So it's always good to pull it up as a reference here. And since I can't get any of that stuff to show up, let's see, is it back here?
Al, can you call it up?
Well, no, it's just the point. I'm just going to say, yeah, because I can pull up Slack here. Let me just do that. Let me say screen share. Let me go back to screen 2. And where's my Slack? It's right here. Oh, there's all my stuff. So for instance, there's just random stuff that I'd say. I don't know why it's showing up like this, but anyway, these are pictures of Bob's stuff right here. And theoretically, you could, so during the Zoom thing, instead of trying to refer somebody back to somewhere, well, we'll pick up his tractor here and see if this runs. Assuming you can see this. And I don't think the audio comes through, and that's some other setting somewhere. So anyway, you could, my point is, you know, if you want to talk about something, it's best to pull up a picture here. So when somebody's watching on Zoom, they don't have to go to try to track it down somewhere else, which may have disappeared somewhere else. So that can be a problem.
Yep.
And just as you do this long enough, you find out all these little things that work and don't work. So I thought I had something else I was going to talk about there, but I forgot what it was. So I guess it doesn't matter. So from a documentation standpoint, yeah, Al documents a lot of stuff out. He's got a get that GitHub page that he started. He's got all kinds of stuff out there, and there's also like the Google Drive that's got stuff on, but it's almost impossible to find anything unless somebody gives you a direct link to it. So, and there's just lots of there's stuff documented on Slack, but as I say, it disappears after 90 days. So don't count on that. So that's pretty much my thoughts on the documentation stuff.
My status for this week is the problem I'm trying to fix at the moment is to have the vehicle run at a consistent speed. Let's see. This is a side view, excuse me, of a servo that's connected to the transmission, which sits back here. I believe my hypothesis at the moment is the servo, which is has some sort of safety circuitry in it. If it uses more than 5 amps, it cuts out, which means the transmission will go back to neutral. And so I've taken this off. I've drilled another hole in this control arm to hopefully get the, this is a calculation that I did that said if I want the servo to run 160 degrees, I think I can get by with 2 3/4 inches of movement, and hopefully it'll be able to handle 87 pounds of torque. I was over here at about 45 pounds of torque, which I think is the limit. So I'm hoping if I reduce this rotation or distance from the center of the torque or center of the rotation, that'll be good. So my status is remove this, drill the new hole, put it back on, and this control rod that is 23 centimeters long now needs to be 29 centimeters long, and I gotta go get that and put it on. I also had to cut this bolt down because now that this is a shorter distance between the center of rotation, and it used to sit above the molding, and now it's got to sit below the molding. So I hacked off that stainless steel bolt and remounted that. So that's my status. I'm trying to get speed under control, and I have to make some adjustment on the transmission control servo in order to do that. And once I get that control rod put back on, I should be able to get back out in the yard and test. The other thing that I need to do that Jeff knows about is publish a topic using them. What do you call it, Jeff? A multi something array. So that I can use Plot Juggler to plot out the data coming back on how I'm controlling that transmission, because that's done at the microcontroller level, not at a ROS level. So I don't have a natural topic to show exactly what I sent the transmission and what it delivered. So anyway, I'm in I think a decent state, but need to get back out do more testing.
So on that last comment about saving the data, anybody that's playing with these vehicles, keep in mind if you use the ROS bag record function, when you start up your ROS program, you can say record, and it'll take all the messages going by and put those into a file for you. And then you can come back later and you can analyze that data and see what it's doing. And I've got a program that takes a bag file and breaks it down into individual topics. And then you fire up Plot Juggler and you can say plot your velocity or plot your angles or positions or plot the commands coming from the remote control. And you can see the commands being generated by ROS. And Plot Juggler is good about it lines all that stuff up. So even though things are happening at different points in time, it lines it up so you know that what's a good example of that? Say you're driving along and your GPS is sampling 10 times a second, and you have wheel encoders running at 100 times a second, and your joystick might be putting out something, say 5 times a second, and Plot Juggler lines all that stuff up in time. I'm not sure how they do it, but if you were to plot this stuff in Excel or something else, you'd have one thing like this, that everything happened, and another one is going to be like this, and the events won't be lined up in there. And somehow Plot Juggler has figured out how to line all that up based on time. And so it's very, very useful to come back and look at it later and say, it did something funny, what happened right there. So you can go back to the Plot Juggler and figure out at what point as you're driving around that happened. And then you can go look at each individual topic and see what was going on at the time. So that's a very, very handy thing to do. And, just right up front, get in the habit of automatically firing up this thing that saves all the data to your hard drive. And then when you're done, you can go back and analyze it.
Jeff's point, there's a couple of, I just try to put everything that I do out in the public domain so that when we get on calls like this, I can just point to it. So there's 2 main repositories. One is the tractor, which is more ROS, and then the other is the embedded code that runs on the microcontrollers. But something like Plot Juggler and how to use it, I try to document what I do, and this is a typical GitHub, right? A build, devel, source folder, but I just also added a folder for project notes. So you'll find, different material out here that is it's useful for me, like how to use Plot Juggler and different stuff is out here. But bottom line is, if you code in the open, then when we get on calls like this, you can sort of point to people and say, what are you having trouble with? Right now, mine is speed control, because this pure pursuit algorithm that we're using, or that we're trying to use, is dependent on the current velocity of the vehicle. And if that goes up and down, then obviously it's going to calculate a different steering angle for the vehicle to follow. And so, I can drive the tractor around the yard manually, as Jeff mentioned, all day long. But there's a long algorithm in here. I was just trying to get to it quickly. It's down at 200. Anyway, there's an algorithm in here. Yeah, there it is. It's calculating command velocity angular z, and I think it's this v underscore is velocity. And because my velocity was going up and down, trying to use pure pursuit, well, I need to eradicate that as a variable in order to find out how to make my vehicle move where I want it to. So I'm blaming my velocity at the moment. We'll see if I'm correct or not. That's all I got. Bob, you want to talk about what you've done?
Oh, can you call up that first picture? July, whatever.
No, that's your thing. Hold on. No.
Yeah.
Back to Slack. Here it is.
This was my first test bed. That VEX system was developed for high school kids back in 2005, and it's been sitting in the box. And I got too impatient to develop remote controls, so I started looking into using this. And as it is, that VEX, that silver box, does put out pulse width modulation, and it's got 8-channel, or it has places for 8 motors, which can be the toy motor or the servo motor. And I'm using 2 ports to go over, jumped over to the breadboard, and then I've got a motor controller just left of that. And in this scenario, I'm just using 12 volts just to see if I can turn those 4 big motors at the top of the screen. And I could with the joystick. In the middle of the picture, there's a bank of VEX motors and VEX servos. And I plug those in just to check the programming to see if it works before I blow up anything else. Yeah. So those will plug into the VEX, and then I can see, or I can use the joysticks to control them. If that works the way I want, then I just jump over to the breadboard and the motor controller and run everything. Run those 4 big motors. Right now I only have 2 channels going, so I only control 2 motors at 12 volts. Well, I figured the motors were going too slow, so I had to jump it up to 24, and that controller will handle 24 volts. So maybe if we can go to another screen, a later one. I think there's one before that. Oh, no, Edward. Okay. Let's just talk about this one. What I've done is I changed out the 12 volts and put 2 12-volt batteries together for 24 volts. And that joystick will run those 2 motors. One motor is for steering, and the other motor is to push or pull on the hydrostatic pedal to go forward or back. I'm finding that remote module, or the joystick, is really, really sensitive. So I'm looking at trying to modify that. And there are adjustments one can make, either through trimming or scaling or something, to slow it down. If I can't, then maybe I'll go back to 12 volts, at least on the throttle control. I like 24 volts on the steering because it's quick. But a long time ago, I had a different setup using electric actuators, and that was too slow to respond. So Jeff told me, you better check how fast you can stop it. And with the old system, the old actuators, it took 25 feet to stop. This one I can stop instantaneously if I have a helmet and safety belt and everything else, but it jerks too much. So I'll still I'll spend some time on it because I can drive it backwards and blow snow off the driveway. I have a snow blower on a 3-point hitch, and in order to remove snow, I have to have my head turned backwards all the time, and I got fed up with that. So I'm confident I can use this somewhat for blowing snow this winter. But since we're going to be selling the hobby farm next year, then next year I'm going to sell the tractor and just remove all the bells and whistles and repurpose it for something else. And that's about where I'm at right now.
The quickest thing you can do on that, controlling your hydrostatic pedal. Yeah, keep that picture up right there. So on your motor, you got that arm coming off the motor and it looks like about a 6-inch arm sticking out. Well, just drill a hole in very close to the pivot point, and that will change it a lot. That'll slow it down a lot if you do that. So just drill a hole closer to the center, and you've got lots of room there. You can pick, maybe put one in the middle, and maybe put one, right close to that round thing, whatever that is. But that will help a lot because the motor will have to turn further and to do the same amount. So that's going to help out quite a bit just doing that.
Okay. That arm is made of aluminum. It came off the floor sweeper, so I can drill that and tap it if I have to. See that gold bar coming off to the right of the motor?
Yes.
That is hardened, and I've gone through a couple of bits trying to drill holes through it. So you got any advice for drilling through hardened metal?
Not right offhand.
Okay.
Maybe put oil on the drill bit when you do it. I can't think.
Yeah. It took me a long time, but I got 2 holes in it, enough to mount to that black 2x4.
On something like that, go out to Google and just say, "What's the trick to drilling hardened steel?" And see what people say.
Yeah. Can you get another picture of the steering wheel?
Sorry to interrupt, but I guess I'll drop off for now. It's 1:20 a.m. here in Singapore. But yeah, it was good chatting with you all. Probably in the next meeting, I will stay for the entire time. I just have an early morning meeting tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. See you all.
No, I took a screenshot of this through the video. I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, go back to Slack and then scroll up where you had the video, and I'll show you.
So you want me to close this?
I got to learn how to share.
So just scroll up the next message up has his steering on it.
Why is it not?
A little more.
There you
there we go. Same motor, or same motor type, is rated for 36. 4. And I like the response to it. Only one problem is where it interfaces or touches the that plywood. It's held by 3 pegs, and sometimes that motor will jump up and out of the socket. So I'm going to have to put longer pegs in, and I don't see that's a problem because I can tap that and put them in longer, and there's plenty of space under the plywood before it hits anything on the steering wheel. There's another picture about the control box.
Before you move on here,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Al. Go ahead and run the video so we can watch the steering wheel turn back and forth. It's not showing up for some reason.
Oh.
Zoom is fighting with us here. So
I think it's buffering or something.
yeah.
Give it a second. Maybe it'll-
And it could be if you click on that and say open in a new tab that it might play better too. I don't know.
hold
So
on.
hit X to close it. And then go on the picture, those 3 dots on the picture, and it'll say, see in the upper right hand, yeah, click on that. And then say, yeah, open a new window.
There you go.
So that's
Yeah,
another
it's
problem we have with Slack
Yeah,
and
it's
Zoom and
buffering.
trying to get all this stuff to work together.
Let me download it. It's buffered up.
So I like the response of it.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get usable information out of this because it's now playing
No.
really fast or not playing at
Yeah.
all. So we may as well move on.
Yeah.
So anyway, to reiterate, he's got a piece of plywood on top of his steering wheel, and he's got the motor
Right.
that's turning the piece of plywood.
Yep. Yeah, it's in there with three 1/2-inch pegs. And I'm gonna have to make those longer. Can you call up the picture with the control box?
Tell me where it is.
It's up, probably up above this before
Yeah. Above that.
that one.
There it is. Yep, that's it. This is the current system. Okay, there's 2 black batteries. That's connected in series for 24 volts. That 24 comes into the motor controller, which is in that lower left inside the box. And then the pulse width signals go over to the controller. The PWM out of that VEX controller, or that VEX box. And let's see. So, and then the 12-volt battery, the one down in the lower left, that controls the electronics. That comes up in to a step down. You'll see a donut ring on the blue board. At the bottom there, that goes from 12 volts down to 9 volts, which powers the VEX, that silver box. Also 12 volts comes into the next step down and goes from 12 down to 5, and that's for expansion. I've been playing around with a Raspberry Pi, or someone said they want to give me some what is it, ESP32s. I should try those. I don't know what to. Anyway, that's going to be experimental space. I've read some cases where they've interfaced the Raspberry Pi into that silver box at the interrupts or at the the analog and digital ports, but it's very, very limited. It's kind of binary stuff that you could do. So in theory, you could use a Raspberry Pi to control the VEX box with 1s and 0s, and then control the motors. But I'm at this point, I'm going to stop and just get back to the Teensy or Raspberry Pi or whatever. Anyway, I can still keep this and have the remote control and the portability I want, and it's just space to add other boards as I develop it. So that's about where I'm at.
these motors look, I mean, although they look a little bit heavier, they look about the diameter of a windshield wiper motor. Is that about right?
They're much bigger than that. They're probably 4 inches in diameter.
Or are they?
They're pretty heavy duty. I was taking a guess whether they'd be strong enough to push down on that lever. So I just threw them in there to see if it would work, and there's enough torque on it that it will. So I never measured how much torque I would, or push pull I would need. I just put them in there and it seems to work. But originally in that 10-inch sweeper, those motors drove round scrubbing brushes about, maybe 12 inches in diameter. So I figured then that'd be pretty strong if they're going to do that.
So they were the scrubbing brush motors. They weren't actually driving the vehicle.
No. These were powering 2 brushes, one on each side of a floor sweeper. And then in the middle, there's a much bigger one that looks like a floor buffer thing. I still have the motors that drove the thing, but there's, they have 2 wheels on them that go the same way. So I don't know if I could use them in a new robot or not without some heavy modification. I might have to go like a 4-wheel drive where one motor controls 2 wheels on one side and a different motor controls the 2 wheels on the right-hand side. But trying to figure out all that in yet, I'm not there yet.
Well, speaking as a guy who's struggled to have steering and throttle under digital control, I applaud your efforts.
I got a long way to go. My biggest problem is my lack of patience. I want something now. And I just have to stop and learn C programming and ROS and all that other stuff. But I wanted something to blow snow with this winter, so that's what I got so far.
Thank you for going through that.
Yep.
So I was going to ask Al, you bought that new giant RC servo, and we were talking about soldering a wire onto the feedback pot. Did you indeed do that?
Not yet, no.
Because when you get ready to do that, let me know. I've got a bunch of comments on that. Because number one, they don't expect you to be doing that, so you have to be careful. If you hook something up and load that down, that then causes the servo to skew off one direction or the other. And the other problem is it puts out a 0 to 5 volts, and you normally use a 0 to 3.3 volt processor. So your first thing would be, oh, I'll put a voltage divider across that to drop it down. Well, that voltage divider is going to load down that pot, and again, it's going to screw up your positioning. And the worst thing that can happen is if you connect it to a microcontroller and you turn the power off, that drags that pin down to 0 volts. And now your RC servo says, oh, I'm not in the right spot. So it's going to slam with all of its power trying to get that around to a point it can never get to. So there's a way around that. You can put an op amp on there to buffer that. And then once you get it buffered, then you can put on a voltage divider or do whatever you want with it. But before you do that, let me know and we can go through that stuff, and I can tell you some of the options you got on that.
Yeah, priority now is to get back out and test, and I know there's a day in my future where the Servo 200, the shaft becomes too destroyed to continue to use, but so far I'm going to stick to the Servo 200. Anything else for recording, guys?
I put somewhere along the line, I put down a note that said Bob steering, and I forgot what that meant. So He showed his motor and turning the steering wheel, and I don't remember why I had written that down. So I guess I need to make a little better notes for the meeting. Back to where I was going through my software, just saying, basically it just says, I looked at it, it's a mess, I need to rewrite it. And that's basically the point where I'm at right now. I just want to get all three steering values coming in to be the same, whether they're in radians or degrees. And then when I switch from one to the other, then it's just a matter of scaling after that. So I just take the angle and scale that to whatever it takes to get the RC servo to go to the correct position. And that's kind of where I'm at on that. I keep thinking I should get right on that. You know, I was running the problem. I was talking about trying to do documentation. Let me make this bigger so might be able to see it. So anyway, I was doing this kind of stuff. I just scribbling crap down, and you can see I was over here. I was scribbling it out and then putting dotted lines and just moving stuff around. And that's where it'd just be handy to have something, you know, a piece of software. I put down blocks and hook them together, and then drag the block without having to do that, because I did that, and then I went back and said, okay, now taking concepts. And this presentation method isn't best either, but you know, they said, okay, here's so I got my joystick coming in. I can scale that to basically scale that to an angle. And on the right hand side, it says command velocity. It's coming in as an angle, and then I scale that. So no, actually, this is the way I originally did it, where right now it comes in the joystick multiplied by an arbitrary scale value, which just scales it right to the RC values that I need. And the other side, I came in as an angle. I was scaling the angle into something for the RC servo. And since those two don't match, it'd be better if I came in on the joystick here and first saying scale that to an angle. So this one says plus or minus 30 degrees, scale the joystick to plus or minus 30 degrees. So down here, when I select from one to the other, they should just automatically work. So I just need to move some code around and get that to work. And then I want to add the third thing that says in a particular mode, read up the switches to tell me which angle to set it at, and then feed that in instead of one of those other two. So that's where I'm at on that stuff.
Cool.
So I think that's all I got for this time. Bob, any more for you?
No, one thing after seeing your drawings, maybe I'll revisit that whiteboard I started and do a better job in documenting there. The only problem is that you have to zoom in and zoom out. And I know you didn't like that, so, but I'll try. And the iPad or Microsoft has something very similar to that whiteboard, and I might switch everything over to that. I don't know. Depends on how much time I have. Right now we're in having negotiations with Itasca County on setbacks for putting a new house, so that's going to be taking quite a bit of time. And they're also revamping Scenic Highway 7, so they're taking land away from us. So it's got a lot of things and a lot of people to talk with. Anyway, that's all I got.
Al, any more from you? Any last thoughts? Okay. It didn't do anything.